Elijah Brooks was sweeping the hallway when a student's laughter echoed. "Hey janitor, want to take the calculus test?" The class roared, but when Elijah picked up the chalk and stepped to the board, everything went dead silent. One by one, the answers appeared, flawless. Then the teacher said 6 words that changed Elijah's life forever. "Where did you steal this from?" Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The corridor outside room 302 glowed with afternoon light, wide windows casting long rectangles of brightness across lockers, shoes and drifting dust motes. The faint hum of fluorescent lights blended with the distant murmur of calculus lectures. Elijah Brooks, 42, a black janitor worn smooth by years of invisible labor, paused at the threshold. He gripped his broom like a baton in a silent orchestra. His uniform, once crisp, showed signs of age. A small tear near the elbow patched over with navy cloth, faint gray lines tracing the path of countless mops. Yet his posture was straight, respectful of the ground beneath him, even if everyone above treated that ground him as disregard. He entered. The room's atmosphere shifted subtly. A few heads jerked, pencils paused, breaths slightly held. It wasn't his first time in the classroom during teaching hours, but something was different. The classroom air felt charged, like a storm gathering around a lone tree. Mr. Spencer Langford stood at the whiteboard, angular in his posture, arms raised in mid-spread, as if orchestrating a symphony of sines and cosines. He wore a dark suit jacket over a crisp shirt, sleeves pressed. He turned as Elijah crossed the threshold. His face broke into a rehearsed smile, polite, practiced and edged with condescension. Elijah's eyes fell only for a heartbeat. He took one step inside, nodding subtly at Langford, before redirecting his gaze toward the front. He set the broom against the wall near the counter, where cleaning supplies stood, neatly arranged, but hidden behind a slightly ajar door to avoid visual discord. The water bucket sloshed softly in the background, a reminder of the physical world he inhabited: wet floors, dust, trash bags. Students watched, not with descending malice, but routine amusement. They were conditioned to find humor quickly. Many of them had seen Elijah before. He was part of the backdrop, as much a fixture as lockers or bulletin boards. Some had teased him in passing, others ignored him entirely. But now eyes flicked from him to Langford, seeking subtle cues. Should we laugh? Should we pretend we don't see him? Langford raised his voice, savoring the slight hush his gesture made. "We'll speak of the devil," he said, voice light, but loaded. "Ladies and gentlemen, calculus has a new savior." The corners of his mouth curved in expectation, as if awaiting applause. A beat of silence followed, then laughter spilled across the room, deliberately loud. It rolled through the class like a wave, puncturing concentration. Elijah maintained his silence. He crouched, ready to mop the spill near the front row, a coffee stain, forming dark, jagged patterns on the pale tile. His hands were sure, his motions practiced. Each stroke erased the mark of carelessness. Each scrub smoothed the surface so that students' shoes might not catch, unaware of the danger of a stray drip. The murmurs continued. Some coughed politely. Others snickered. Langford's face held the satisfaction of a jester who'd landed a punchline. He turned back toward the board, as if dismissing the moment entirely. The students returned to their work, but a new edge had entered the room. Langford continued, pointing to the complex integral on the board. Multivariable calculus. Nested. Intense. He flourished his marker as if issuing a challenge. "Elijah," he said loud enough that the last row heard, "you think you can solve this?" Another wave of laughter. The sound ricocheted off the walls, mocking. Students leaned back, eased into their seats, eyes locked on Elijah, waiting for his reaction, or lack thereof. Phones were already cropping up on laps, ready to capture the anticipated flounder. Elijah stood, his breath steady, a faint crease between his brows. In that tight moment, the room's energy condensed. Teachers often used him as a prop. That was normal. But Elijah was not a prop. He was a man who once chased theories in universities, whose mind had roamed realms of math, where few dared tread. Yet no one here knew that. He stepped forward, one measured pace, broom and rag still in hand. The carpet mortar cracked slightly beneath his shoe, reminding him of the fragility beneath imposed weight. Langford cleared his throat, shifting on his heels. His eyes flicked downward as Elijah approached, searching for footing. for the moment when the show would collapse. Students leaned, phones tilted. The world seemed to pause in anticipation of embarrassment. Elijah paused at the edge of the whiteboard, his reflection faint in the glossy surface. He raised his hand, chalk in fingers, dusted white, and paused another beat. For an instant, he wasn't a custodian. He was memory, hunger, ancestral pride. He recalled times when he erased mistakes on chalkboards in university halls, when professors nodded at his insight, when he sketched landscapes of numbers so beautiful they drew gasps. He recalled the late nights with volumes of textbooks, dreams of publication, all stolen by systems that weren't ready for a black mind shining that bright. He pressed the chalk to the board. Langford's smirk sharpened. "Really? Go ahead then," Elijah wrote. One fluid line, then another. Variables simplified magically. Substitutions drawn cleanly. Step by step, he unraveled the integral. Even before the answer emerged, understanding began to cleave through the room. Some students' eyes widened. Others sat frozen, psyched by the sight of someone dismantling a problem they themselves feared. Elijah wrote each line with the precision of someone who'd done this thousands of times, even though it felt like the first time. He didn't glance around. He didn't need validation. The chalkboard became an extension of his voice. His mind moved like a specter among symbols, mapping out patterns, simplifying with grace. Langford swallowed, his throat tight. The students, some stopped mid-breath. Others with raised hands paused. It was too sharp a contrast, laughter now replaced by silence so deep it throbbed. Elijah reached the final line of the solution. A calm inhale, a slight hand motion to indicate completion. He placed the chalk back in the tray, cloth folded neatly in his hand. His breathing didn't quicken. His posture remained quiet strength. No one moved. Langford raised his eyebrows. Lips parted. For once, no snide remark came. The mocker had become the unmoved object of their own spectacle. Then a whisper. Soft, tight with wonder. "I can't believe he just solved that." It came from Harper. Voice cracked. Next to her, someone let their mouth hang open. Phone still in hands, but cameras lowered. Langford cleared his throat, trying to reset the class. "Well," he began, voice unsteady, searching for control. That was impressive." He paused, penciled smile now unconvincing. Students stirred, uneasy. Elijah lowered his head, nodded slightly, an invisible statement to himself. He picked up the mop bucket quietly, motioned toward the stain he'd intended to clean. But no one volunteered to retrieve his rag or refill the bucket. Instead, they watched. Langford turned back to the board, waving an up-close gesture. "Let's return to the lecture, shall we?" But nothing felt the same. Phones clicked. Whispers flickered. For the first time, Elijah felt seen, but not in the way Langford intended. He felt his own quiet power, born from years of erasure. As he began collecting his tools, a student in the back, Keon, slipped his phone beneath the desk. The screen glowed faintly, recording, the angle perfect to capture the entire equation, in Elijah's careful hands. Elijah glanced in Keon's direction, just once. Their eyes met. Keon lowered his gaze. Elijah didn't pause, but his heart tightened. That meeting wasn't about recognition. It was dangerous visibility. Elijah fetched his broom, placed it gently against the wall once more. He turned and exited the classroom as quietly as he entered. The hallway swallowed the soft thud of his steps. The classroom remained suspended in that moment. Neither fully recovered laughter nor resumed instruction. That night, as Elijah quietly sorted cleaning supplies in the dim light of the janitorial closet, he felt an unfamiliar electric buzz in his pocket. A notification. He reached for his phone, just one alert, and found the video. It had been uploaded, and it was already spreading faster than he ever expected. A flutter ran through the classroom, not the giggling energy that had greeted Elijah's entrance, but something heavier, sharper, as though the air itself were drawing breath in awe. Every pen poised, every calculator still. Each student watched as Elijah Brooks' chalk sliced across the whiteboard, carving out memories long buried. Elijah wrote with a precision that silenced the room. Step by step, he untangled the complex integral, recognizing each term, applying the right theorems, substituting variables with effortless clarity. It was the same mind, the same genius that had once dazzled halls far bigger than this, before racism and fear had forced him into invisibility. He recalled flashes, Dim library lights flickering over stacks of thick textbooks. The smell of chalk dust on his fingers, late into the night. He'd once walked these paths of discovery proudly, his name printed in university journals, the base of his academic dreams laid in glowing praise. That world had slammed shut when colleagues questioned his integrity, when a white peer took credit for his theorem, and when professors whispered too good to be true behind his back. Richard Belford had been the one rich family, polished suit, and stolen words. He'd stood at the podium, presenting Elijah's dissertation draft as his own. Her knew of Elijah's brilliance. Elijah trusted him. The betrayal was sharp, but the institution had been silent. Logos of academia can be cold when image outweighs justice. Now Elijah traced the final line of the solution. Clean, concise, impossible to dispute. His hand did not shake. His breathing did not waver, but inside for a moment his heart thundered. He no longer believed he could stand at such a board again. But here he was. From the back of the classroom, Langford cleared his throat, attempting to reclaim the moment. "Well," he said, forcing laughter to fill the emptiness. "Looks like our janitor might have had some secret calculus tutoring after all." No laughter. Only stunned silence. The students, once complicit in the mockery, watched his aging uniform and imagined the mind beneath it. Not just a man who swept floors, but someone who had once navigated abstract landscapes of numbers with authority. Harper's jaw dropped. Kean clutched his desk, knuckles whitening. For some this was more than academic. It was disorientation. How could someone dismissed be so towering in intellect? Langford shifted. Uncomfortable. He forced a laugh again, but it sounded brittle. "Well, okay, I suppose I misjudged." His voice was tight. The students glanced between Langford and Elijah, unsure where loyalty now lay. Then Harper whispered, so softly that only half the row heard, "I've never seen anyone do that except Mr. Davis. And he's a college professor." She glanced at Elijah, whose face remained calm, detached, but his eyes shimmered with something ancient, something fierce. Langford cleared his throat again, flicking his marker pens as if punctuation could reset the atmosphere. He gestured toward the board, toward the problem, as if it belonged to him. "Anyway, let's proceed." But the usual click and tap of pens didn't return. Instead there was murmuring that rose and fell like waves crashing on an unseen shore. Kean, in the back corner, held up his phone beneath the desk. The little red light blinked. He was recording unseen, perhaps, but deliberate. Kean had seen injustice before, often masked as jokes. He felt the glint of this moment like a spark. Langford swallowed. He knew his control was slipping. Meanwhile, Elijah slowly wiped the board with a gentle arcs. No rush, no triumph. He wiped the residue of chalk from his hands with the rag tucked into his belt. Those chalk dust flecks caught in the bright fluorescent light, dust that clung to the fabric of his sleeve. Invisible when he passed through, visible now in this fractured clarity. He didn't speak. He didn't look back. His silence had become a statement. The power lay in restraint. The class remained frozen in their seats. Some students looked ashamed, others in awe. Langford cleared his throat again. "All right, looks like we've all learned something today." The teacher's forced smile hadn't reached his eyes. He pointed at another formula on the board. The next scheduled topic, a tangent. It felt casual, but nothing about the room felt casual anymore. Elijah set the bucket down and retreated toward the door. Each step echoed slightly in the hushed room. No one followed. No one volunteered to help. This was still his place to exit, still his role to leave the scene and remain unlabeled. He paused at the threshold, hand on the doorknob. The eyes of the class fixed upon him like specters of memory, of things unseen for too long. Harper's gaze was open and unjudging. Others just stared, uncertain how to reconcile the man they thought they knew with the one who had just redefined him in silence. Elijah left the room. The door clicked softly shut behind him. Silence stretched. The students exchanged glances. Phones lowered. Some exhaled slowly. Some for confusion. Some for reverence. Langford stared at the board, as if the chalk lines might vanish. He cleared his throat and turned to face the class. His jaw set. The moment had shifted. Later that day, Elijah sat alone in the janitor's closet, sorting cleaning supplies, when a school email ping echoed in the hush. It was from the principal's office. "Mr. Brooks, please report to the main office at 4:00 p.m. Elijah's heart skipped. He had not been praised. He'd drawn attention. What might the principal want? That was unexpected. He'd expected punishment, maybe a formal reprimand, or worse, to stay invisible. Yet here was an official meeting request, ambiguous and chilling. That night, a student's social media post, shot from an angle capturing every calculated line of Elijah's solution sequence, blazed across platforms, tagged Black Brilliance and Calculus Janitor. Before Elijah even reached home, the video had begun trending, but one comment stopped him cold. This can't be real. And the account that posted it belonged to the dean of admissions. The morning air at Riverway High carried a different hum, one not wrought by the movement of students through lockers or distant class bells, but by the unquiet buzz of notifications and whispered speculation. Word had spread. Elijah Brooks, the soft-spoken janitor who'd stepped up to solve a calculus problem in room 302, had become an unexpected lightning rod on the internet. Inside the halls, phones glowed in hands as students scrolled through feeds. In English class, someone's TikTok video played on the projector, angles of Elijah's fingers tracing equations, the chalk trailing through complexity, as if writing poetry itself. A hush followed that clip. Cameras caught the clean strokes through a lens. Somehow, those strokes carried centuries of erased histories. On Twitter, at first it was an awkward retweet from a student with a few dozen followers, captioned, "Okay, but did you see the janitor solve calculus?" That was enough. The clip leapt onto the algorithmic waves, picked up by larger pages, Daily Mindblower, Classroom Genius, and bigger aggregator accounts. Soon it was paired with hashtags, Janitor Genius, Black Excellence, Calculus Mystery. Comments exploded. Some posts brimmed with awe. This is Black Brilliance. Period. He must have studied it once. I mean, how? This proves what schools ignore. But friction flashed too. Probably memorized it. No way a janitor could truly understand that. Staged. Looks like a teacher trick. Clickbait.
Why show this dude?
That's just virtue signaling. On Reddit, the thread "Janitor solves calculus problem" skyrocketed. Upvotes soared past 10,000. Long, fractious comments argued whether the clip was authentic or fabricated. Some commenters argued bravely, "We need math programs for custodial staff. This is systemic failure." Others countered, cynically, "Publicity stunt. He's clearly coached." Elijah, meanwhile, carried on his morning routine, as though nothing had changed. He swept corridors, fixed leaky faucets, emptied trash bins. His hands moved without thought through ritual. But his chest tightened with each faint echo of a barked Elijah, or a phone camera quickly hidden in a backpack. Every surface he touched felt more public. Even the worn handles of his mop seemed to tremble with potential exposure. At lunch, students clustered in groups, discussing the video in halting tone, as if the thought of saying Elijah's name out loud tested them. A few brave voices tried to explain. "He used substitution twice," one said. Another whispered, "He didn't get confused once." But they stopped themselves, uncertain how to weigh admiration without sounding cliché. That evening, the school's IT logs faintly glowed with traffic spikes from school IPs. The principal's assistant frowned at the dashboard, clicking tabs, video views, network downloads, file shares. She flagged the principal, noting dramatic shifts. Across town, in living rooms and dorm rooms, the video played on loop. On TikTok, it had crossed 500,000 views. Twitter mentions soared. Instagram stories layered the clip with commentary stickers. "Mind blown. This is crazy." National pages picked it up. "The janitor who outsolved the students." "When genius wears a custodial vest." Each shared the same clip with slightly different tone. Some inspirational, some skeptical. The client image of a janitor became charged with possibility, rupture, and accusation. Then, more than admiration and disbelief, came backlash. In comment threads, terms flickered. "Not everything is a metaphor. He's being used. Systems playing us," all claiming this was less brilliance than exploitation. A few sharp posts even mocked the entire premise. "Guess calculus is just rags to riches now." It returned Elijah's life to him, in waves. In the locker room, one student approached, glanced nervously, and said, "Video is blowing up." Elijah nodded, said little. He knew eyes followed him. He felt the video's weight in hollow stares and lingering silences. Meanwhile, Mr. Langford, who had tested the waters of mockery, watched the fanfare engulf him too. He read through comments on Twitter, eyes shifting from pride to panic. On his phone, someone had already tagged him, Teacher tries to embarrass janitor, ends up humiliated. He tried to claim disassociation in a brief post. Saw the clip, not staged, was just trying to inject humor. Didn't expect, but his words rang hollow. They drew more scorn. So you admit you set him up. Typical perfunctory apology. Langford's internal calculations churned. Was Elijah agent or victim here? He tried to dismiss it in conversations with colleagues, but the staff room wasn't silent. Teachers traded stories. One had a parent call demanding video context. Another whispered about liability, reputations, curriculum integrity. Elijah, despite the chaos, continued cleaning classrooms. He passed room 302 twice after school. Eyes on the dusty board, chalk traces half erased. The integral that had stunned so many now loomed faded, but alive in shadows of dust. Inside, memory pressed again, years before, long nights at 17. Back then, he had sat in a diner's back booth, fingers moving over the grease-stained menus, as if they were his only canvas. His mother near the coffee station, wiped counters, humming so softly he sometimes thought she knew his future better than he did. Those menus were covered with integrals, with sketches of functions, scribbled while waiting for the diner's rush to calm. No one saw them, but those scribbles were seeds of Elijah's mind. He had shoveled fries behind a counter while dreams writhed in his brain. Professors at night school saw the brilliance. Scholarships whispered, but academia's door slammed when they questioned whether a dishwasher's kid could be true. He was accused falsely of plagiarizing a peer's paper, papers he'd drafted months before. He lost everything: scholarship, thesis, voice. So when he returned to Riverway years later, he vowed to remain invisible. Custodian, cleaners are not looked at. Invisible can be safe. Now he found no peace in invisibility. Cameras had shattered it. At home he ignored the ringing phone. His daughter tried to get him to watch the video. He said only, "Just doing my work." The phone buzzed again. News outlets began to call. Local reporters, curious, respectful, sometimes condescending, asked for an interview. Elijah declined. One of the anchors left a voicemail. "We'd love to tell your story." He listened in silence. He thought of his mother's voice. "Stay safe, son." He thought of the dinner menus, math and crumbs. He thought of the chalk lines. He thought of how visibility can be both a weapon and a wound. Mr. Langford, alone in his office, opened a browser to check school policy. He considered calling Elijah, to suggest controlling the narrative. Maybe a press conference, a standardized explanation, but his tongue stilled. He had mocked Elijah, not realizing he was inviting the storm. As night deepened, Elijah sat in his small apartment, faint glow of street lamps on the kitchen floor. He stared at the phone, video replayed in his mind, chalk equation, silent authority. He turned off the phone. He didn't know how to answer the world's questions. He only knew how to answer the cleaning calls. The following afternoon, his phone chimed again. It was a notification from an unknown number. "This is Channel 12 News. We want to air your face tonight. Will you come on camera?" Elijah stared long and still, then quietly whispered to himself, "No," and didn't pick up. The school corridors pulsed with an electricity that Elijah could feel but not hear. Lips curled in tentative smiles when students passed. Doors opened for him. Gestures intended as kindness, but heavy with performative humility. He carried on sweeping the hallway outside, room 210, as if the world around him had not shifted. In silence that felt louder than applause, his choice not to speak became its own answer. Elijah valued humility. It was taught by his mother, who in quieter days had said, "Pride is fine, Elijah, but let it whisper, not roar." Now with the spotlight suddenly turned on him, the whisper felt louder than any riotous cheer. Newspapers speculated about his background, past degrees, hidden tutelage. Maybe a former teacher had polished his mind. But none asked quietly, "Do you want this?" No one could see the exhaustion in Elijah's eyes behind the carefully composed calm. Inside, the pain of past betrayals churned quietly. Years ago at Millstone University, brilliant minds had praised him, until jealousy molded admiration into suspicion. His paperwork, his handwritten drafts, the early equations, stuck in old textbooks, all shadowed by the false accusation of plagiarism. That accusation, voiced lightly by white faculty members, had shattered more than his career. It hollowed out the trust he had in institutions, in education, even in himself. He had left then, knowing the university would not protect him. They erased him. His name didn't appear on published papers. His drafts were archived, unread, gathering dust. They told him politely it was safer to withdraw. You're talented, yes, they said, but controversy carries baggage we cannot abide. And so he quietly disappeared, gathering dust in the memory of academe, and in the corners of classrooms like riverways far from journals and citation. Back in present-day Riverway, Elijah felt that old echo of erasure again, slipping down his spine. The world wanted a story, a redemption arc, an underdog triumph, but he spun no narrative that belonged to them. His values said, let work speak, but not headline. He wanted nothing of fame, of cameras pointed at his scarred dignity, of a world that had hurt him, weaving him into their feel-good highlight reels. And yet inside the school, the court of public attention had already spoken. Students greeted him differently, respectful nods, murmured thank you, as he cleaned. Some offered guarded admiration, others wore it like armor, pretending not to notice. In staff rooms the tension rippled, teachers traded stories in whispers. He was amazing, but what does he want now? Few dared approach him. Then the workload shifted subtly. The custodial schedule, once fair and predictable, rotated against him. He was assigned more draining tasks, deep cleaning hallways on weekends, scrubbing bathroom tiles after hours, cleaning the sports locker rooms when no one else was scheduled. No explanation was offered. It wasn't direct punishment, but it felt like one. An undercurrent of retribution ran through the schedule change. They couldn't mock him publicly anymore, so they relegated him quietly, invisibly, to the back of the operations roster. Elijah felt the familiar ache of being erased, not by words this time, but by overwork, by invisibility in labor. It echoed the academic erasure he'd suffered before. There was anger, but it whispered, not roared. He stuck to routine. He swept, mopped, emptied trash. He kept his head down. Then, one afternoon, the principal's secretary handed a letter to him. Posture stiff. It was handwritten, heavy paper, elegant loops of ink spelling his name, Mr. Elijah Brooks. His heart both quickened and sank. He turned it over in his hands, weighed the smoothness of the envelope. He hadn't been invited to anything. He feared the worst. Could it be a complaint? A confrontation? That evening, the building was dark aside from security lights. Elijah walked past locked classrooms, his shadow long and solitary. He paused by room 302, where the chalkboard still bore the faint residue of his solution. A soft memory, chalk dust on his fingertips. The stunned quiet of that room. He traced the board with his eyes, even though the room was locked. The glass shadowed. The residue felt like a fingerprint, a testament to something erased yet never gone. Elijah opened the letter at home. The handwriting was refined, mature, familiar, and then his blood roared in his veins at recognition. The letter began, Dear Elijah, I hope this finds you well. You may not remember me, but I haven't forgotten you. I followed your work, though you might call it obscurity. You have never been safe from my admiration. My name is Professor Lila Caro, from Millstone University. It was from a math professor who once had tried to protect him. His throat became dry as he read. Professor Caro had been one of the few allies in graduate school, a rare figure of genuine support. She'd sent him notes, defended him in meetings, secretly forwarded his thesis drafts to publishers, even when others actively worked to bury it. After the scandal, she had quietly reached out multiple times. He had ignored every letter, hurt too deep to revive trust. Her letter continued, I know you rejected every previous attempt to contact you. I understand why. But I am writing again, because what you did in that classroom, rebirth of a truth long denied, it shook me, and I believe you deserve more than silence. I would like to meet when you are ready, to discuss acknowledgments, your work, restitution. I will be in town next week. If you'd allow, I'd like to talk. Elijah sat back, trembling. The voice that once shielded him from academica was back. But what did he owe her? Could he trust again? Could he risk further hurt? Or was silence now the only armor he had? He folded the letter, pressed it to his chest, breathing shallow. The fear of public scrutiny churned in him. He remembered being burned once already. Dignity taken. Trust betrayed. Is this another trap disguised as redemption? In silence he wept. He slept uneasily, dreams churning with equations, and apology letters he never sent. The next morning, he carried the folded letter in his uniform pocket, beneath the custodial services patch, near his heart. At the end of his shift, he tucked it back in, barely folded. No one noticed. As Elijah stood in the janitor's closet that afternoon, listening to the quiet click of the mop bucket handle, his phone vibrated again. A notification: Channel 5 has confirmed Professor Caro will be interviewed live tonight, and your name came up. Elijah's blood froze. Elijah held Professor Caro's letter in trembling hands, long after he'd placed it under his mattress, the inked words glowing in the pale moonlight, slanting through his apartment curtains. The echoes of her voice, one of the few voices that had ever defended him at Millstone, rattled in his mind. For a moment, he allowed himself to imagine what might follow: recognition, truth, restoration. But beneath the fragile hope lay deeper wounds, still raw. At night, when the world was hushed, he revisited memories no one asked him to remember. The auditorium at Millstone University, packed with faculty and peers. He had stepped onto the stage to defend his dissertation about applying advanced multivariable techniques to dynamic systems, one of the few young black scholars to do so there. His slides flickered in the projector's glare, his voice steady. Then came the attack. His advisor, Dr. Morris Ellington, had lined up questions so pointed they revealed more about his assumptions than the thesis. Next, Dr. Richard Balford took the stage to present what sounded suspiciously like Elijah's core argument. Whispers spread, striking similarity, they said, then outright claims: Elijah Brooks's work may not be original. The denials, the scrutiny, the paperwork disappearing. The night he returned to his office to discover his entire folder emptied, notes, drafts, data gone. The betrayal hadn't been loud, just spectral. Academic theft covered by polite protocols, formal hearings, dodged calls. He was told lack of provenance, uncertainties in data sourcing. And when he demanded answers, he found walls and men in suits whose eyes showed pity and pragmatism, not conviction of wrongdoing, but fear of implications. His trustees told him, "This isn't a racial issue, Mr. Brooks." He heard them say it mouth dry, while they buried his future. In the years that followed, he erased people from memory. He erased his own name. He erased his research. He walked away, his dreams stolen in silence. Now her words, Professor Lena Waverly, apologizing for not intervening strongly enough, inviting him to the alumni conference, pulled those ghosts from the corners, made them visible again. The letter had come on a Thursday. On Friday, Riverway's intercom crackled. "Attention staff and students," Principal Donovan's voice proclaimed over the reverberating speaker. "This Friday at 6 p.m., we will host an alumni event in the auditorium. Distinguished alumni will share achievements in STEM fields." There was no mention of Elijah, yet he could feel the subtle shift in atmosphere. He knew he was being talked about. That afternoon, as he emptied the trash cans near the auditorium entrance, he overheard Mr. Langford speaking on the phone. "An alumni event is good PR," he said quietly, eyes on Elijah's back. "We can frame this as affirmative action in real time. Make the school look inclusive. The video, the janitor, it's optics gold." Langford's words cut deeper than any insult. He was using Elijah, not supporting him. Elijah had expected mockery. He had not expected institutional exploitation. That night, Elijah couldn't sleep. Shadows on his ceiling drawn by streetlights became lectures he once delivered. Chalk dust in the cracks between his fingers became data he'd lost. The ghost of his stolen future whispered, "They never saw you as a scholar. They only ever saw you in a custodial uniform." He wept again for everything erased. A few days later, Professor Waverly's email followed the letter. It was polite, calm, professional, but heavy. "Elijah, please consider attending our panel at the alumni conference. I will introduce you and allow you space to speak, not as a janitor, but as the scholar you always were." The invitation reverberated through his bones. It was the opportunity to reclaim his narrative. But fear so tightly wrapped around his heart made his limbs heavy. He worried. What if his admission of pain could be spun against him? What if they called it venting or grievance tourism? Would he become a symbol, a brief viral sensation, exploited, renamed, repackaged? At Riverway, Mr. Langford began subtly undermining him. In front of students, he commented, half joke, half venom, "I suppose this is what happens when you let custodial staff near the board. Next we'll have chefs writing dissertations." Some teachers laughed uncomfortably. Some students snickered. Others looked away, their eyes shining with shame. Elijah, sweeping under the bleachers after a basketball game, heard it. He felt the words reverberate through the boards, through the rows of seats where he cleaned, but never stood. But he did not respond. He wiped sweat from his brow, swept away confetti, and bowed his head. Silence, again, was his shield. Professor Waverley's voice arrived in his mailbox again, soft but firm. Elijah, your truth matters. You don't have to speak, but if you wish to, you will have allies and voices like mine. So he hesitated. Days passed. He considered her offer constantly. The chance to stand, to reclaim, to finally speak in front of people who really saw him. But the ghosts asked, what's the cost? Old betrayals lent their weight. Elbow-worn jackets, whitewashed lies, tragedy of being just a janitor. And yet inside him stirred a hungry fire, a demand for justice, for witness, for the story they stole. He was torn. Love of quiet dignity versus the burden of remaining erased. On the morning of the conference, he had not signed up. He wore his uniform. Early shift, rubber-soled shoes squeaking softly in empty halls. Hallways smelled of floor polish and anticipation. Posters lined the walls. Welcome alumni. Riverway celebrates STEM achievements. None mentioned him. None invited him. But inside he trembled. Unexpectedly, early that afternoon he received a call from Professor Waverley. Will you come just for 5 minutes? No speech necessary. Just me and you, in the green room before the panel. I want you there. Her voice was calm, unwavering. His breath caught. He said nothing. Not yes, not no. He just ended the call. Time waited. The chatter backstage at the auditorium smelled of perfume, polished shoes, suit jackets, and pride. Distinguished alumni greeted each other. A student tech crew tested microphones. He stood in the wings, broom in hand, feeling both the weight of cleaning labor and the gravity of possibility. He had never been backstage as more than a janitor. This time he wasn't sure which part he was cast in. Mr. Langford, stationed by the proscenium arch, offered him a clipped nod. Good luck tonight, he said. Words could hide a razor. Elijah let his eyes drift across the audience, seating empty now, but soon filled with people expecting a show. For the first time in years, he considered stepping forward, not as an errand runner, not as a placeholder, but as the man whose mind had never been erased. The auditorium doors opened, rustling fabric and footsteps filling the space. He inhaled the scent of upholstered seats and glossed wood. He felt the weight of the stolen future and the weight of the moment. He thought of his mother's voice, of chalk dust, of erased thesis pages. He stepped forward into uninvited territory. Elijah walked in unannounced to the school board meeting. Tucked under his arm was Professor Waverley's letter and his own prepared statement. He arrived before they started, and when the board members looked up startled, he said only, "I'm here to speak." Riverway High's boardroom smelled of polished wood and suppressed tension. Late afternoon sun filtered through tall windows, casting long bars of light across the long table where school board members sat, papers and laptops arrayed like ceremonial weapons. Inside that room, decisions about curriculum and policy were made quietly, or so they thought. Elijah Brooks stood outside the frosted door, hearing the hum of voices discussing budgets, standardized testing, AP course allocations. He did not belong there. He reminded himself of this as he pushed the door open only slightly, hesitant but determined. The custodial services patch on his uniform felt heavier than ever, a silent label in a room designed to ignore his kind. His heart thundered. Still he stepped in. Conversation paused. Board members exchanged startled glances. Some recognized him. Mr. Garnett. The board president blinked behind his glasses. Teachers in attendance shifted uncomfortably. A snapshot of disbelief hung in the air. Elijah lifted his hands empty. His voice edged into the silence, calm but eyes fierce with quiet fury. With all due respect, I'd like to speak. His words cut through the perfumed air. Power shifted toward him. Unexpected, but undeniable. They let him speak. Elijah's voice didn't waver. He outlined a painful landscape. Black students entering high school honors classes at a rate half that of their white peers. AP STEM enrollment practices, with opaque prerequisites. Guidance counselors channeling black students toward vocational training rather than calculus or physics. Though he had no formal seat at the table, he spoke as one who had studied the margins and the center of education. He described the shapeless weight of silent expectations, the way students of color were conditioned to believe they didn't belong in spaces built for others. He described data he had gathered quietly, graduation and course tracking reports he'd peeked into, then committed to memory, filling notebooks he covertly kept in his locker for nights he couldn't sleep. He said, "You funnel us out of STEM, not because of lack of ability, but lack of invitation. You build walls of bias that begin as microaggressions and end as barriers." Board members fidgeted. Some shifted in their chairs. A teacher on the dais pressed a hand into her chest, as though physically receiving his words. Others stared blankly, fingers already moving to type defensively on keyboards. Langford pressed his lips tight. He'd sat deeper into shadows since the viral moment. Now he looked pained, caught between pride for Elijah's words and fear of the spotlight. Elijah spoke of accumulating harm, of black students told they aren't cut out for calculus, subtle discouragement from department heads, scholarship advisors who never reached out. He spoke calmly, washing complexity over every face in the room. His words were sharper than shouts. Every syllable pried open veins of guilt, of unspoken complicity. Now tears formed in the corners of his eyes, quiet tremors of long-held grief. When he paused, the room felt cracked, like stained glass poised to shatter. A few board members shifted formal papers in front of them, pretending business as usual. But others glared at the display of dignity they'd never invited. A teacher stood and left her back stiff, jaw clenched. Another followed. Elijah watched, without flinching. Silence settled. The board president cleared his throat. After a moment, the president said, voice low, "Mr. Brooks, thank you. No one has spoken like that in this room before." Elijah nodded, turned every step echoing with reclaimed power, and exited the room. In the hallway, students and faculty alike seemed to catch their breath. Word of what happened spread like wildfire. Elijah interrupted power, and power stopped. Weeks later, chantings began. During lunch, students gathered in circles near the bleachers, whispering his words, passing copies of his message written in sticky notes. "We belong in STEM." Teachers pulled Elijah aside, offering quiet murmurs of support. A few parents sent handwritten cards thanking him for speaking. But under the rising cheers, something else lurked. That night after school, Elijah rounded the corner to the row of lockers. His own locker stood quiet beneath flickering fluorescent lights. His hands held his keys, mind replaying the look on the board members' faces. Then, graffiti. Scrawled across the front in thick black marker, "Stay in your place." His breath caught cold and ragged. This was not detritus or random vandalism. This was intentional. Punishment cloaked as threat. A warning that his words, his intelligence, his presence, had crossed an invisible line. But at that moment, Elijah didn't retreat. Instead, he stood still, fingers brushing the insult carved into metal. Because power had entered his bones, the room had held its breath. Now he knew what would be earned, and endured in the world he spoke up to change. Riverway High stirred in the hours after school, the ache of its silence replaced by unexpected commotion. The locker area where Elijah stood shattered in graffiti now felt like the epicenter of something larger. At first only whispers drifted through the hallways, teachers stopping mid-step, students passing folded arms, parents glancing through open classroom windows. The graffiti was not Elijah's to report. He felt the need to hold steady. It would feel like admitting weakness, so he did not report it. Still, the door whispered open when a student named Maya Reyes, brave and anxious, slipped inside after hours to document the words. Photos uploaded with quiet urgency. A student's simple act began the turning. By dawn, the phrase "stay in your place" had seeped across social media, accompanied by photos and outrage. Parents, long accustomed to the school's image of perfection, blinked at a new version of Riverway. Black students who had felt invisible for years, felt seen first by the vandal, then by the flare of support it ignited. Black students and allies organized a chalk-in. At first it was a whisper among a group calling itself Riverway STEM Allies. They carried packets of chalk and sketches of formulas, simple integrals, symbolic equalities into the early morning light. They wrote on sidewalks, steps, even the brick walls of the auditorium entrance, "Our minds matter. Mathematics belongs to us too. I am not invisible." Elijah noticed as he swept the walkway near the front entrance. His broom paused mid-sweep when he saw chalk outlines of equations winding across the pavement, like a river reclaiming its course. A group of students, black, white, Latinx, a spectrum of skin tones and courage hovered around the chalk, hands dusty, faces bright. That morning, the school was not silent. It was singing. But with visibility came backlash. Conservative parents organized under the banner "Keep Politics Out of Schools." Their emails arrived en masse. Messages demanding the school denounce the chalk messages. Some called it propaganda. Others called for Elijah's suspension, or for tighter rules on student protests. The PTA, previously reserved and polite, ignited with rage and defensiveness. School newsletters stopped being neutral. Parent conferences filled with arguments, with one mother shouting through tears, "You're turning our school into a circus." Langford appeared on a local radio show midday. His voice clipped and formal but trembling under the edges. Elijah's actions were noble but misplaced, he said, trying to thread the needle between support and control. Yes, the chalk-in was visually powerful, but we must maintain academic decorum. Encouraging defiance or disorder undermines our learning environment. The radio host nodded politely, feeding back listeners' concerns about mixing activism with education. In classrooms, debates roiled. Some students argued that chalk was vandalism, others said it was speech. Teachers tried to moderate, wincing under the tension. Some encouraged dialogue, others shushed the debate, reminding everyone that calculus began after the bell. On a gray evening, the PTA met in the auditorium. The room smelled of coffee and textbook bindings. Chairs creaked, as parents took seats in neat rows, their faces tense. The principal stood at the podium, flanked by the board. Elijah sat against a far wall, uniform spotless, presence quiet, but not unseen. The room crackled with unspoken frustration. A mother rose, voice tight. "This is supposed to be a place of learning, not politics. I want my child focused on their upcoming AP exams, not chalk slogans in the hallway." A father stood next. "I pay taxes so my child can go here. This spectacle compromises our school's reputation." From the back, a soft voice imploded into the auditorium's hush. It was Jasmine Rudd, her shoulders squared. "Mr. Langford," she said, voice steady, eyes bright with clarity. "When I was a sophomore, I asked to move into AP Calculus, because I knew I was capable." His response: "Not enough room." Yet the spaces were there. My grades were erased. I was moved into consumer math. A wave of shock rolled through the room. Heads turned. Muttering began. Elijah rose then, but Jasmine continued. "I've found the counselor's notes. Email threads from guidance suggest they didn't believe someone like me belonged. They misrepresented my grades to prevent me from being allowed into that class." A hush fell. The room held its breath at the tilt of honesty. Langford flushed, eyes darting. He stammered. That was procedural. There was policy." From across the auditorium, a teacher stood, exasperated. "Policy is not an excuse for discrimination." Murmurs turned toward uproar. Some parents gasped. Others looked at Jasmine with admiration, at Elijah with renewed respect. The school board leaned forward, uncomfortable. Meanwhile, outside, students gathered in circles distributing chalk, still writing, still debating. They chanted Elijah's name like a hymn, not loud, not violent, but persistent. An unexpected twist came when the principal, Ms. Donovan, stood to speak. Her voice was softer and steadier than anyone expected. "We must remember," she said, "this school belongs to all of us. Elijah Brooks has given us a challenge, not a disruption. We can respond with punitive measures, or with change." The crowd stilled under her words. Transformation hovered in the air. In that tension, Elijah saw possibility. Systems can fracture. Narratives can shift. Visibility can demand accountability. The chalk on the paths wasn't chalk anymore. It was map. It was blueprint. Families began to shift seats. Children looked on with new eyes. The auditorium seemed older, more honest with every confession and response. As the PTA meeting wound down, Elijah turned toward the blowout doors, ready to leave. Then a voice stopped him. A board member urgently whispered in his direction. A former student, recently graduated, had stepped forward to testify. She claimed Mr. Langford had doctored her grades to keep her out of AP Math. And she wasn't the only one. Elijah stepped into the softly lit hallway of Riverway High, his reflection warped against glass trophy cases lining the walls, symbols of achievement, of victory, of accolades. He carried the weight of Jasmine Rudd's testimony in his heart. Her proof emails, graded assignments, counselor notes, was gold, undeniable human evidence, carved out of institutional shapes that sought to ignore systemic patterns. He had seen those documents, hidden in Jasmine's locker one afternoon when she entrusted them to him behind the faded stage curtains, her hand trembling with vulnerability. He did not want the spotlight. He never had. But truth has a way of amplifying itself. In the days after Jasmine's revelation, the school's climate shifted like a leaf turning in wind. The local newspaper ran a front-page story, from chalk-in to expose, 2 racial bias incidents linked to one teacher. Langford's name loomed large as both cause and subject. Parents read it over breakfast. Teachers scanned the pages with wide eyes. Students felt a mixture of vindication and fear that speaking up could change things, but also make you a target. Elijah remained behind the scenes. He cleaned classrooms when sunlight streamed in like forgiveness. He scrubbed desks that once felt like instruments of erasure. He moved silently, holding Jasmine's evidence close, not to shield it from view, but to let it emerge only on their terms. Meanwhile, the school administration launched an internal investigation. Papers shuffled in brown folders. HR officials met behind closed doors. Pertinent emails were subpoenaed. Jasmine's proofs became central. More students came forward, sending scanned copies quietly to the principal. Another senior dropped their name and story. A counselor recalled whispers ignored. A fellow janitor confessed a rumor. Amid rising pressure, board members met. Langford was placed on administrative leave, pending investigation. The official statement read, in sterile corporate tones. His response was swift. He released a terse memo of defamation, insinuating that he would explore legal avenues to protect his reputation. The tension coalesced in that statement. Words as weapons, threats as shield. Rumors around campus muttered about secret meetings, parental pressure, calls to local news stations. Every hallway had an echo now. Through it all, Elijah stayed quiet publicly. He delivered mop buckets, emptied trash, straightened chairs, in classrooms that brimmed with conflicting energies. He supported Jasmine from the shadows, ensuring she had comfort, that she wasn't alone. He offered water, a quiet nod in the kitchen, assurance that speaking truth was a fortress, no matter how heavy the stones. One morning, as sunbeams caught specks of dust glossing the marble floor, the school secretary delivered an unassuming envelope. It lay on the custodial closet shelf, plain brown, no return address. Elijah stared at it for minutes, mop in hand. His pulse clicked. Mystery in ordinary things shakes you differently than overt assaults. He pried it open after his shift. Inside was a single folded page and a small heavy key, an old skeleton key with a brass tag stamped Storage Jan 47. The note's handwriting was unfamiliar, elegant. Elijah, the truth you carry deserves a place where it can be found. I couldn't be there in person. This holds the next piece. Dr. Lena Waverly. Shock rippled through him. He knew Dr. Waverly had helped him once, but she had invited him to speak at the alumni panel. He believed her support had ended there. He never expected more. Not this. Now it seemed she was sending him into hidden corridors of memory and evidence. The key burned cold in his palm. Was she offering him access to archives where his original thesis drafts, letters, and proofs rested? Hidden in storage somewhere? Or was it a trap masked by kindness? Shame curled in his chest. How could he trust again? He stared at the envelope, the key, the impossible invitation to reopen the stolen pieces of himself. At school, whispers followed him again. A student said they saw him with the skeleton key. Another claimed doors in the old science wing upstairs had been unlocked after hours. Teachers heard low rumors of someone drilling into locked cabinets. Langford's suspension amplified the story. His threat of lawsuit became secondary to the discovery of deep archives. The scandal morphed, growing into a strange momentum where Elijah's silence was louder than any press release. He had given no statement, yet his presence dominated headlines. Janitor holds the key. Literally. Social media spun conspiracy key to the unknown went viral. Memes showed a golden key hovering over a chalkboard equation. Elijah shut doors most evenings to keep the noise out. His daughter tried to ask him, "Are you okay, Dad?" He nodded, his voice soft. "I'm trying to be." Yet inside, he grappled with a fierce trust battle. Could he walk into that storage unit, knowing memories there were not just documents but confirmations of a life erased? Could he believe Dr. Waverly's intentions? He recalled her quiet support at Millstone, the offers to bring him to meetings, the way she had fought when others quietly surrendered. Was this another sheltered corner or a doorway to vindication? The next day, He entered the school board building once more, not to speak, but to drop off some cleaning supplies. The key felt heavy in his pocket. It weighed more than metal. The board president passed him in the hallway. Eyes flicked with new calculation, respect, fear. Elijah smiled faintly, acknowledging the awake eyes that saw him now. Word spread that evening. Dr. Waverly is in town. She has arranged to go to that storage unit tomorrow afternoon, and she expects you there if you're willing. Elijah read the message on his phone, transmitted in a private group sharing logistics for Jasmine and allies. His breath caught. He ran a finger down the key's curve, skin cold from the brass. Fear and resolve wrestled in his chest. The ghosts of his stolen future had begun stirring again. Now he stood before the door to open them, or perhaps relock them forever. The following afternoon, just as the late school sun filtered through shuttered windows, Elijah turned the key in storage on 47's lock, and the door creaked open. Inside, beneath dust and layers of neglect, lay a wooden crate stamped with his name, and a notice, property of Millstone University, private archives. Elijah turned the ancient skeleton key in the lock of storage on 47, with trembling fingers, the brass beneath his skin colder than he expected. Silence surrounded him in that forgotten hallway. The muffled hum of school life beyond the locked door barely a heartbeat away. The lock clicked, resisting for a moment as if testing its obligation to guard secrets. Then the latch yielded, and the door swung open. The air inside smelled of dust, old paper, and time. An archive more than a closet. A single light bulb, yellowed and hesitant, shone down, revealing crates stacked in crooked rows and file boxes on metal shelves. Elijah stepped inside, the echo of his footsteps soft against concrete floor. The world outside felt distant now, absurdly bright. He carried himself like a scholar unearthing his own past. Each shift of his broom earlier that day, each silent nod along corridors, had led to this threshold. Now, with the door open, he felt the weight of history pressing in, the fine margins of erased research, the equations he'd drawn in silence, the documents that had disappeared. The first crate near the center of the unit was marked with a peeling label. Brooks E., handwritten in dark ink. Elijah's chest tightened. He knelt, careful not to disturb the dust. Lifting the lid, he found stacks of journals thick with his handwriting, equations, partial derivatives, unstable systems analysis, side notes in red ink, sketches where thought met desperation. He let his trembling fingers trace the edges of the spiral binding lines. He wrote as a young man burning with hope in a place that refused to see him. Under that lay drafts of his dissertation, stapled proposals, letters from professors who had praised his insight months before his expulsion, recommendation letters from mentors who believed in him, in the boy who solved integrals on diner menus, and underneath yellowed copies of emails printed and bound in his advisor's name, correspondence discussing his work with another student, approval for revisions, acknowledgments that mirrored the wording of his own pages. Elijah swallowed hard. These weren't just papers. They were proof that the work, the thinking, the mind they sought to overshadow it had existed, and someone had tried to erase it. On the floor next to the crate was a filing box, labeled Balfour Publications, smaller but heavy. He pulled it out, his breath hitching. Inside were drafts of an article in progress, submitted under the name of Richard Balfour. The introduction mirrored paragraphs in Elijah's stolen dissertation. Email threads between Balfour and a senior editor, Caro Seed, discussing minor revisions, but the core mathematical proofs were identical to Elijah's. Dates earlier than the journal's submission deadlines overlapped with his own final drafts. He read one message where the editor wrote to Balfour, "Your clarity is remarkable. The equations are elegant. Your narrative concise." A timestamp read 3 days after Elijah's advisor had taken his folder. It was not just coincidence. It was theft, sanctioned by silence. Elijah pressed his palm to his chest. His heart ached with rage and grief. Memories of screaming into an empty office, trying to make anyone believe the theft he had felt nothing as painful as this realization. Now more than sorrow, there was resolve. He flipped back to his journals, sketches scrawled in margins, telling stories of grueling nights in libraries, of brilliance stoked by necessity. He realized he had everything he needed to prove his claim. Not just in his mind, but resting under dust in this crate. But the folder also contained another twist. Buried in drafts was a letter from Dr. Lena Waverly, dated months before his expulsion. It was a draft to the dean, pleading with them to reinvestigate accusations made against Elijah, warning of bias and institutional risk. But the letter was stamped and marked, "Do not file." It hadn't been sent. Waverly had written it but been intercepted. Someone had silenced her too. Elijah closed his eyes, pain flooding anew. Betrayal so deep, it cut through time. He held the letter tight. She had tried to stop it, but been stopped. The shadows in the storage unit felt heavier now, like guardians of lies, and Elijah, kneeling amid the crates, held the truth in his hands. The stolen legacy, the erased future, now tangible. He gathered the crates, organizing them neatly for transport or for exhibition. Eyes fixed on the dusty boxes, he understood these papers could vindicate him. They could shake Millstone University, the faculty, the white corridors of academic prestige that had swallowed him. They could protect future students from silence. But there was fear too. Exposing this meant retaliation. Lawsuits, silent campaigns, professional destruction of Waverly, of Jasmine, of him. Still, he slid papers into a secure folder, each page trembling with implicit power. He stood, legs aching from kneeling, carrying the crate from storage. The hallway outside echoed with footsteps, late custodians locking up, or students lingering. He felt eyes on him, some curious, some fearful. Unexpected twist. As Elijah rounded a corner, he almost collided with Dr. Waverly herself, unannounced and ghost-like in her presence. She looked at him, her eyes wide, silent but charged. In her hand she held a second set of drafts, the original signed submissions, earlier versions of the same material he held. She cleared her throat softly. "I couldn't find a safe place. I thought this closet might be ours." Elijah stared, words lodged in his throat. She had risked more than he realized to secure the proof. Her presence changed the weight of his resolve. Now it was not just his redemption, but theirs together. They stood in shared quiet, the stolen future laid bare between them. A crate between confessions and plans. His phone buzzed. A text from Jasmine. "Ready when you are." He exhaled. Tomorrow held confrontation, but he no longer stood alone. At dawn, Elijah meets with a civil rights attorney, an impassioned, well-known education equity litigator by the name of Marisol Vega, who arrives with a briefcase full of precedents and a fierce glint in her eyes. She lays a single document on the table, a legal motion to subpoena the university archives, including Dr. Balford's communications, and to pursue a case of institutional theft and racial discrimination. Elijah's heartbeat thundered. This was real. But when he looks up, the attorney says, "They might come for you first." Elijah sat across the polished mahogany desk in a softly lit law office, the weight of everything he held threatening to collapse the room's quiet. Maurice Callan, a tall man with silvering hair and a reputation for taking on David vs. Goliath cases, leaned forward, reading through Elijah's packet of documentation. The thick binder contained the journals, email chains, thesis drafts, professor recommendations, all the proof of intellectual theft and racial discrimination. The silence between them pulsed with possibility. Maurice finally looked up, fingers intertwined. "Mr. Brooks," he said, voice low and steady, "this is one of the strongest cases I've ever seen. Academic institutions don't sue students or custodial staff. They settle, but this goes deeper. You're not just suing for misattributed work, you're challenging systemic erasure." Elijah nodded slowly, chest tightening. He felt raw, exposed, like someone splitting open the wound to cleanse it. But also indifferent, in that moment, to anything but justice. He'd tried silence. It had failed him. Maurice continued, "A civil suit will be filed this week. Claims intellectual property theft, violation of your moral rights, racial discrimination in academic processes. We'll seek damages, but most critically, we'll demand acknowledgement. We'll ask the court to subpoena Millstone University's archives, faculty communications, submission records, everything." Outside the office window, the city moved under late daylight, oblivious to the storm being summoned within these papers. Elijah inhaled, tasted the gravity of his own voice, voiceless for years. Within days, university press offices buzzed. Professors swept old papers off web pages. Dr. Balford's CV was scrubbed of publications from the relevant years. Millstone posted a vague statement. "We do not comment on pending litigation." Media outlets smelled the transformation. Stories proliferated. Janitor versus university. The fight for intellectual justice. Black scholar hidden behind the Mop Files lawsuit. Education journalists drew parallels to similar cases of faculty, whose research had been appropriated by institutions or colleagues. Headlines examined the broader failure of universities to protect or properly credit scholars from marginalized backgrounds. Elijah became something he never expected. A symbol. High school students held signs at rallying local protests. Truth demands citation, custodian, scholar, equal. Women of color in academia shared his story in Twitter threads, recalling their own erasures. Others shared screenshots of Jasmine's proofs, of the storage crate's photos, of the skeleton key. He did not become a public speaker. He remained reluctant. Yet interviews followed, radio programs offering to highlight his case, news reporters knocking on his doorstep. He refused to be a headline. But people carried his name into conversations that had never included Black brilliance in STEM before. Inside Riverway High, whispers settled around staff rooms. Students watched him in hallways with a newfound different respect. Some reached out, struggling with recognition. Your story, it's real. A math teacher placed a handwritten note in his locker. Thank you for doing what I couldn't. These gestures were small, but they felt monumental. Meanwhile, Millstone's legal team released thinly veiled defenses. Anonymous professors published op-eds in academic journals on fair use of ideas, on how concurrent discovery sometimes occurs. Attempts to discredit Elijah emerged, suggestions that his papers were not formal submissions, claims that he lacked institutional affiliation, innuendos that the dispute should be settled privately. But the papers' his own handwriting stood firm. Maurice's motion was filed in federal court. The language was precise and unyielding. This is not about flawed memory. This is about institutional theft of academic labor. Elijah watched his name appear in court dockets, proof that his past was now a case sanctioned and serious. As court dates were announced, the academic world stirred. Department chairs hissed to each other. Journals that unwittingly published the plagiarized work considered retractions. Conferences debated ethics panels with titles like When Academia Fails Its Own. To Elijah, the days stretched under quiet tension. Court filings, depositions, expert witnesses, including mathematicians affirming the originality of his proofs, motions and hearings became the new rhythm of his life. He worked his custodial schedule in between, bringing paperwork with him into empty classrooms, cleaning while flipping through deposition questions, hidden behind mop buckets and floor polish. Then came the shock. The university's legal counsel filed a motion to dismiss. The filing was formal, thick with jargon. It claimed Elijah's filing was insufficient, because his work had not been peer-reviewed, that the statute of limitations had passed, that any similarities were due to common knowledge and concurrent research. The motion implied counterclaims: defamation, unauthorized use of proprietary documents, breach of confidentiality. Elijah felt a wave of nausea. It changed the fight's tenor. This was no longer just about recognition. It was about survival. Public opinion had shifted. Reputations hung in balance. He looked up at Maurice, who sat across from him, jaw tight but steady. We expected a motion to dismiss, Maurice said softly. We expected counterclaims. It's part of the strategy to intimidate you. But we have evidence, stronger than theirs. We'll respond. Elijah exhaled. The courtroom became less theoretical and more personal. The university, so distant and institutional, now felt predatory and alive. The veil was lifted. At night, after returning to his apartment, Elijah checked his email to find a single new message from an unknown address. The subject line read, "Interested in settling quietly." The body contained one sentence: "We have information that could destroy Caro, and we can make this go away for a price." Elijah Brooks walked into the high-ceilinged courtroom that morning with measured steps, dressed modestly in a dark sweater and pressed slacks. The mahogany benches and carved details of the room seemed older than any injustice he'd felt, as if the walls themselves bore witness to generations of hidden conflict. He paused just inside the doorway, catching his reflection in the polished brass emblem behind the judge's bench. A marked solitude, a scholar eclipsed by others until now. This was not a vindication he sought, but existence. He didn't expect justice, only acknowledgement, proof that he was real, and his truth could not be erased. Maurice Callan stood beside him, reviewing notes with Jasmine and Dr. Waverly, in the gallery seats, faces supportive, strained by the weight of their alliance. The court filled gradually. The defense table, the university's counsel, journalists filling the last rows, and a silent outpouring of supporters in the gallery. Among them were black students with shaky hands clutching signs. Scholars, not janitors. Truth must be heard. The bailiff called the court to order, and the judge, an older woman, gray hair pulled into a neat bun, tapped her gavel. She glanced at Elijah briefly, her gaze neither dismissive nor indulgent, but cautious, and Elijah let silence fill that moment, letting it Testimonies began, with deposition of Jasmine Rudd. She spoke quietly, but resolutely, her voice echoing off stone walls, as she described being diverted from AP courses, guided toward remedial classes, despite high grades. Her voice quavered slightly, when reading from counselor emails she'd preserved, emails where Langford and others had noted concerns about her fitting in, or overreaching. Elijah glanced at Mr. Langford's face, taut with denial. Langford scribbled notes, occasionally glancing toward university counsel. The courtroom listened. Dr. Waverly's typed note, draft of a letter never filed, became evidence in Jasmine's hand. She handed it over to Maurice, who placed it gently on the evidence table. The silence that followed was heavy. Next, the deposition of the archivist, a mild-mannered librarian, who had discovered the forgotten crates in storage N47, and had flagged them under protocol. His testimony tied the physical papers to date-stamped evidence, logging chain of custody details. He described how school policy required deans to review research archives, how the crate had gone unnoticed for a year, until Dr. Waverly mentioned its existence. His calm clarity made the courtroom lean in. Then came Elijah's own deposition. He rose to stand at the witness dock, chest high, voice steady. He spoke methodically, explaining his academic trajectory, his abrupt expulsion, the disappearance of his dissertation, and document. He described the night he discovered drafts gone, the accusation of plagiarism lodged against him despite his work being original. He traced the theft, the subsequent silence, his retreat into invisibility. He catalogued the impact, the loss of career, trust, recognition, identity. When he spoke of seeing his own words published under another's name, tears glistened momentarily in his eyes. But his voice did not break, not even when he described the fear that recognition could hurt his daughter's future, or when he whispered the memory of the diner menus, sticky with grease but filled with his mathematical dreams. The defense attorney, Maurice, guided him through intricate math details, draft comparisons, email overlaps, margin annotations, the proof of conceptual theft. Witnesses were called, mathematicians who had reviewed Elijah's original notebooks, confirming the proofs were both original and rigorous. Academic integrity experts outlined how rare such overlapping of content was, unless deliberate. Under oath, the evidence unfolded like precise equations forming truth. The university's counsel rose next. His voice polished, he attempted to argue concurrent discovery, common mathematical territory. He referenced academic practice of parallel research. He noted no intent had been proven, that sting of criminal mindset, but claimed institutional safeguards had been followed. That phrase echoed, institutional safeguards. It was here the university began crumbling. Emails surfaced, dozens of them, sent weeks after Elijah's expulsion, among senior faculty, including Balfour and professors on the publication committees. They were excited by the new work with elegant proofs. Others had frowned when Waverly's draft letter had appeared in a district inbox, but no record showed that it had been forwarded to the dean. Evidence of cover-up. Langford's involvement emerged tangentially. A decades-old email, where he had advocated for Elijah to be invited into a visiting research project. Rare but seen. The recruiter's tone enthusiastic, but the project was cancelled days later without explanation. That email, recovered from a professor's backup files, revealed Langford had once believed in Elijah's promise, but later participated in the erasure, perhaps under institutional pressure. A hush fell. The university's veneer of impartiality split. Lines blurred, collusion and fear and silence lay bare. Then came the viral moment. Midway through testimony, a professor testifying on policy and oversight leaned forward. Her voice faltered as she recounted she had begged decision-makers not to expel Elijah. She recalled his brilliance, how dozens of grad students had admired his drive, how one faculty member had later insisted his thesis be destroyed as too controversial for their university's reputation. She broke down under oath, her voice cracked. Tears rolled. The wall of rational detachment in the room shattered. Cameras from seated reporters captured the moment. A tenured faculty member, the face of supposed objectivity, confessing that Elijah was right. that they had buried brilliance to protect comfort, that he had not just existed, he had been known, suppressed. The courtroom whispered, from the gallery to the benches to the staff rooms beyond. This was not a spectacle. This was confession. Elijah closed his eyes. The weight of years of absence pressed inward. Yet something in that professor's breakdown felt like a lifeline. Invisible chains loosened. After the confession, media outlets exploded. Breaking professor admits cover-up under oath. Social media threads tagged Elijah Brooks with reverence. Education think pieces reeled. The crisis of academic racism, of institutions built to protect prestige over truth. Elijah's testimony ended. He walked out of the courtroom with steady steps. Outside, students and allies waited, phones poised, faces impassioned. He gave no speeches. He only nodded, and in the hush of approaching support, he found his voice had already spoken loud. That evening, as Elijah returned home, a ping on his phone broke the quiet. A video clip had gone viral, a recording of the professor's confession under oath, her tears echoing in hushed halls. But just beneath the clip was a comment, "Watch for the next twist." Someone handed the letter to the dean. They weren't the first betrayer, and the uploader's name was anonymous. Elijah entered the courtroom before the morning sun fully flooded the street outside, its muted light filtering through high windows and landing softly on the polished wooden courtroom floor. This morning was different. He carried a whiteboard under his arm, rolled like a banner of defiance rather than tools of labor. The hum in the room had changed. It wasn't anticipation now, but tension like the still air before a storm. He positioned the whiteboard next to the witness stand. The lawyer, Maurice Callan, placed his hand lightly on it, offering a silent moment of support. Cameras clicked. Reporters leaned in. For Elijah, this moment wasn't about eloquence or charisma. It was about precision, equation, proof, truth. When the judge nodded to commence, Elijah stepped forward. He picked up a thick marker, his fingers steady. He turned to the audience, then to the jury, his gaze clear and unwavering. No passion, no flourish, just clarity. He drew a symbol, then another, linking terms carefully. The statements he made under oath were precise. These weren't memories or testimonials, but exact mathematics. The integral symbol he wrote, with elegant simplicity, matched the one he had solved during that class at Riverway. The partial derivatives, the nested terms, all drawn on the board as though calling out for reckoning. Whispers rustled. In the gallery, students held their breath. In the jury box, eyes narrowed, leaning forward. Institutional silence cracked under the weight of his chalked embodiment of stolen brilliance. A mathematician took the stand next. Dr. Serena Cho, specialized in advanced calculus, testified that not only did Elijah originate the equation, but its conceptual structure also formed the backbone of a widely used calculus textbook published by a major academic press. Her voice was calm but firm. This structure, she said, pointing to the whiteboard, is unique in its approach. It is not common knowledge. It reflects original insight. This text, written without proper attribution, significantly influenced the curriculum used across the country. Gasps nodded through the courtroom discreetly. The textbook had been on high school shelves, in college syllabi, credited to someone else entirely, and now, it lay at Elijah's chalk-written feet. Public perception began to shift as news trickled out in real time. Social media lit up with clips of Elijah drawing on the board, interspersed with reactions. Equations can't lie. We saw the math and truth. He's not just janitor. He's justice. The hashtag John Truth in Numbers trended. Across the nation, in academic lounges and coffee shops, professors whispered about the case. Some messaged Elijah, in solidarity. Others remained silent, fearful of institutional reprisal. Back in the courtroom, the university's defense tried to reclaim the narrative, suggesting that math is collective, that concepts can be rediscovered independently. But Dr. Cho shook her head gently. That degree of parallel discovery, using identical proof structure and notation, is exceedingly improbable without direct derivation. Maurice Callan used that silence, then introduced evidence. Publication drafts surfaced, with corrected versions showing earlier errors found only in Elijah's original notebooks, proof that the work had been his. The narrative shifted from plausible deniability to undeniable plagiarism. Elijah, standing behind his whiteboard, felt tension in his chest. This was vindication, but still precarious. Every moment balanced hope and fear. After the mathematician, others testified, The archivist reaffirmed the dates of storage. Jasmine recounted the emotional cost, how it felt to fight for someone who believed in her own brilliance. Dr. Waverly reiterated that her letter had been suppressed. Across the courtroom, Mr. Langford, in attendance, sat still. His earlier statements, discrediting Elijah, hung between him and the unfolding truth. Then came an unexpected twist. A previously silent faculty member, an adjunct whose career had been quietly overshadowed, rose to deliver a statement under oath, calling Elijah his mentor, crediting him for late-night study sessions in the math department when Elijah was still a student. He said that the mutual respect had been real, and that decision-makers at Millstone had seen Elijah's potential yet feared it. The room shifted. It was not just testimony of injustice. It was affirmation of community and suppressed recognition. Public perception shifted further. Newspapers printed op-eds by academics who spoke of the tragedy of silencing minoritized scholars. Student groups at universities cited the case in policy forums, demanding clearer protections for non-tenure track voices. Elijah did not smile. He felt weight settle in his throat. This was power, not loud, but undeniable. Jury deliberations began. Outside, a soft crowd had gathered. Students chanting, allies holding banners. Numbers tell truth, they read. You belong in STEM, they chanted. People spoke in awed tones. He solved that integral. Math doesn't lie. At Riverway High, teachers whispered in halls. Some wiped away chalk on boards that bore remnants of the protest. Others quietly pinned Jasmine's papers to classroom walls. Back in the courtroom, hours passed. The judge called for closure. When the jury emerged, they carried copies of Elijah's equations in their hands. The tension was toothy, electric. Then, at home that night, Elijah's phone buzzed. A notification from the school district's official Twitter handle appeared. He felt a thump in his chest. The message read, Riverway School District welcomes Elijah Brooks as visiting lecturer in advanced mathematics. Effective immediately. Elijah stared. The offer was real. A formal job opportunity. Recognition not just for him but for what he represented. Lecture halls in place of broom closets. Students speaking his name, not as rumor but as teacher. But before joy could bloom, Maurice sent a message. The verdict isn't final. The district could retract if pressure mounts. Elijah read it slowly. Jury deliberation ended. Members returned, faces composed. The judge asked if they had a verdict. They nodded. Before the foreperson spoke the words that could remake Elijah's life, the door behind them opened. A courtroom assistant entered, pale and shaking, holding a sealed letter addressed to Elijah. The courtroom went still, and all eyes turned to the envelope, wondering, what does this letter say? Elijah Brooks closed the doors of the school auditorium behind him, the applause still echoing softly in the chamber. The same halls where he once moved unseen, now pulsed with recognition. Staff members rose to their feet. Students in uniform cheered, faces alight with pride. The murmurs, once tinged with disbelief, now carried reverence. That's Mr. Brooks, their teacher. He stood at the front, heart steady but bright with emotion. His uniform long exchanged for a crisp dress shirt and slacks. The label custodial services, replaced by visiting lecturer in advanced mathematics. The chalkboard behind him glowed cleanly, ready for equations, not spill. In the hush, respect filled the air. Mr. Langford, absent from the initial presentation, appeared in the back row. He looked older here, shoulders hunched under weight of pressure. Rumors had swirled in the faculty lounge. Langford was forced to resign. The board's final decision had been swift, public, aligned with community outcry. Now his door stood empty, his presence replaced by respect for Elijah's intellect and integrity. Elijah's shift into the classroom was more than symbolic. Weeks earlier, the board had approved a new position, visiting calculus lecturer in residence, part-time, focused on mentoring students of color. It was proposed by Jasmine and other student leaders in collaboration with Dr. Waverly and Maurice. Today that proposal took shape. He opened the lesson with precision. Equations scrawled sharp and confident across the board. Integrals glowed under soft lights. Students leaned forward, not out of curiosity but connection. Quiet reverence filled the room. Unexpectedly, near the end of class, Jasmine slipped to the front and softly presented a plaque to Elijah. Brooks Scholarship in Advanced Mathematics, in honor of Mary Ann Brooks. Her mother's name. The scholarship, funded by community donations and alumni, would support students from underrepresented backgrounds, seeking STEM degrees. Emotion swelled in Elijah's chest as he gently brushed his fingertips across the polished wood of the plaque, his voice thick with memory. "My mother believed every formula had dignity," he said, voice soft. "She taught me that numbers are truth, even when the world tells you you're invisible." A ripple of applause followed. He held back tears, breathing in the moment. In the following weeks, Elijah hosted afternoon sessions, the Brooks Math Talks, a safe space for students of color to explore calculus, ask questions, dream. He pulled chairs close, sat cross-legged, chalk in hand. He remembered the diner menus, his mother humming behind the counter. He felt her presence in each student's striving. School assemblies shifted tone. Where once pep rallies centered sports and applause, now equity was celebrated. Students of diverse backgrounds were recognized at honors ceremonies. The change, once fragile, felt sustained, grounded in something deeper than optics. Faculty, too, began to shift. Some approached Elijah, quietly asking for math tutoring strategies, asking how to make classes more inclusive. Others lingered at his office door, unspoken regrets in their eyes. Elijah responded with kindness, sharing resources, offering feedback. Forgiveness felt too ambitious, so instead he offered fairness. Then came the twist. Late one evening, Elijah received a message from Professor Caro. She asked to meet him urgently in the library archive room. Heart heavy, he entered after hours. She was there, holding a yellowed, ornate envelope. "I found this," she said quietly. Inside was Elijah's original doctorate diploma, never revoked, never rescinded, quietly stored in faculty files under his name. It had the signatures, date, thesis title. It seemed untouched, ignored but preserved. "They never processed the revocation, but neither did they file any record of your degree," she explained. "Technically, you were never stripped of it." Elijah stared. The diploma was at once validation and agony. He had lived years in absence of his own credentials, teaching under a title that nearly erased him. Now this diploma, hidden here, waiting undiscovered, felt like heretical proof that erasure can be both omission and commission. He placed the diploma in his drawer. It completed a circle, but also renewed questions. Did he want full reinstatement? A PhD after all this? Or was the classroom, the scholarship, living proof enough? Within days, the school board announced formal appointment. Dr. Elijah Brooks would deliver a guest lecture at graduation, and would continue as visiting lecturer next semester. Rumors said Langford's resignation had been a condition for Elijah's appointment. The school's public messaging called it transformational change. At Riverway High, corridors throbbed with a new refrain. He deserved more than a broom. The phrase, once unspoken, was now chalked across walls beside integral equations. Elijah's office, a repurposed storage room, was decorated simply framed diploma, photographs of past students, scholarship plaque, and his mother's humming lyrics printed softly on a paper pinned above his desk. "Even in shadows, truth will find the light." Students visited. Keisha, a junior, spoke her dreams over coffee after class. "I want to go into astrophysics now, because you showed me I can." Elijah nodded, eyes shining. He would mentor her. He'd help her write scholarship essays. He'd recommend her for programs. Assemblies doubled as awards for the Brooks Scholarship recipients. Tears, laughter, music, honors for those who might one day change STEM fields. Elijah watched them with soft satisfaction. Win after small, personal revolution. Yet, as the semester rolled toward conclusion, a sense of anticipation surged. Newspapers ran follow-up stories. Custodian turned lecturer now gaining national attention. University programs invited him to speak. Institutional walls were bowing before the force of his story, one forged from erasure, resilience, and chalk. One morning, marked by golden sunrise through the math lab windows, Elijah checked his email and found an invitation that stunned him. "You are invited to deliver the commencement address at Hudson Montclair University this spring." His breath caught and he stared at the screen, knowing that delivering this speech would carry more weight than any math proof ever could. Hudson Montclair University's auditorium glowed under soft stage lights, the air thick with anticipation. Elijah Brooks, groomed neat in a dark suit, stood behind the podium. Rows of caps and gowns in the audience extended before him like a sea, a generation poised at threshold, seeking words to carry them forward. This was not a moment he sought for himself. It was far larger, a chance to speak into the silence, not just of his own life, but of all those blurred by assumption, dismissed by uniform, erased by convenience. When he stepped to the microphone, the hall hushed, the weight of expectation, of history, pressed against his chest. He spoke with clarity and calm, his voice unwavering. "Graduates," he began, "words like dreamer and overcomer won't help you much if the world sees you but does not hear you. Behind every dismissal, every glance that recognizes your presence but not your promise lies a deeper truth." He told them of missed lectures and nights spent drafting equations on diner menus, of stolen papers buried in archival darkness. He spoke of disguised racism in academic corridors, the traps of doubt laid by others, and the power in reclaiming one's narrative. The audience sat rapt. Families held breath. Professors dabbed at eyes. Jasmine sat near the front, tears shining like bright stars in her eyes. Dr. Caro in the faculty section looked grave, her hands clasped at chest level. Then, with measured cadence, Elijah folded in a truth that stunned the room. "I once thought my dreams were extinguished when labeled janitor. But today, here I stand not as an exception, but as proof. The same mind dismissed can also transform the world." His words echoed in the stillness, settling into hearts. When he finished, the auditorium erupted, not polite applause, but deep, swelling recognition. He closed his eyes briefly, feeling the honor of being seen. After the ceremony, Dean Alvarez approached him. The dean, a man of formal generosity, placed a velvet-cushioned box in Elijah's hands, opened it to reveal an honorary doctorate. The engraving read, "Honorary Doctorate." The engraving read, "Honorary Doctorate of Mathematics, Hudson Montclair University." Elijah's breath caught. He placed a hand over his heart. The robes he'd never held, the degree he'd earned years ago, but had been denied. This gesture affirmed both his stolen past and his public reclamation. Dr. Waverly stepped forward, voice trembling as she took his hand. "I failed you then," she said, voice thick. "I watched criminals of silence steal your legacy, and I was silent. I'm so sorry, Elijah." She clenched the robes, her eyes moist. For the first time she wept openly in public. His heart wrenched at her apology, but it felt too late, and yet exactly in time. Elijah embraced her, quietly forgiving more than words allowed. The auditorium staff, unaware of its significance, passed diplomas and flowers. Journalists hovered, capturing every nod, every tear. Unexpected twist. In the crowd near the back, standing just outside the roped-off area, was Richard Balford. His face was pale, a mask of regret mingled with something else. He watched Elijah receive applause that once should have been his. When Balford's eyes met Elijah's, there was no triumph, only a shadowed acknowledgement that the truth had finally caught up. Later, towards evening, Elijah walked backstage, the duplicitous world of achievement shimmering in the lamplight. Reporters pressed for statements. Parents congratulated him, but his eyes kept returning to Balford's figure, gone now, but present in memory. That night, after the crowds dispersed, Elijah stood alone, in the empty auditorium. The stage was still, the echoes of his speech lingering in the air. He closed his eyes, breathed deep and slow, memories of erased dreams and reclaimed hope flickering in his mind. As Elijah prepared to leave the auditorium, a staff courier approached him with a sealed envelope, elegantly handwritten, "To Elijah Brooks." His heartbeat skipped. He opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a single sheet of thick stationery bearing one line, "After all these years, I have no words. We meet again. R.B." The crate of institutional secrets now held a place of honor on Elijah Brooks's private study shelf. No longer hidden dusty vaults, but curated emblems of truth proven. Days after the commencement speech, Elijah received the envelope from Balford, the man who had stolen his dreams. Inside, a note, hand-scrawled in faded blue ink. "Elijah, I'm sorry. I cannot undo what was done, but I regret it every day I breathe. R.B." These 3 lines, trembled and precise, felt like feathers placed on the chest of a giant. They barely disturbed the weight of years, but they were words, and words persisted. The apology was weak, too short, too late, but it was also confession. Somewhere in those bare words was acknowledgement, and he would give them space to exist without granting them power. Elijah folded the letter and placed it in an archival sleeve. He did not respond. He knew that words unspoken often hold more strength than those lightly given. Instead, he decided something radical. He would donate the letter to a museum exhibit, dedicated to racial injustice in academia, a physical testament to how institutions swallow voices, and how even weak apologies must be preserved for history. He made arrangements. The note would rest under glass, its brevity a testament to the sting of partial remorse. It would sit beside his thesis drafts, Jasmine's proofs, the dusty crate, the skeleton key, all bearers of truth. This was not vengeance, but visibility. In quiet moments, Elijah turned his attention to his writing desk. He opened a fresh document titled The Janitor's Theorem. It was his book, the full memoir, a blend of mathematical beauty, stolen legacy, and fight for dignity. He wrote through nights, fingers tracing lines of narrative and equations alike. He dedicated chapters to his mother's humming in the diner, the chalk dust on his fingertips, Jasmine's courage, Dr. Waverly's regrets, Maurice's strategy meetings, and that final speech. He wrote not for fame but for closure. Every word, every equation, felt like placing a brick in a bridge between erasure and recognition. Unexpected twist. One afternoon, as he revised sections about his grandfather, who had taught him to see the patterns in clouds and numbers, a letter arrived, postmarked from abroad. The return address was obscure. Inside was a photocopy of a newspaper clipping, decades old, an announcement of a math scholarship at Balford's alma mater. It named Elijah's work in the footnote, but credited Balford. It was the root of publication misattribution. The clipping unsigned confirmed that Elijah's brilliance had been hidden for years, still floating in the scholarly world under another name. That clipping, too, went into the archive, a tattered ghost of stolen recognition. 3 years passed. Elijah's book was published and became a staple in university reading lists for courses on ethics in STEM and racial justice. He traveled sparingly for book events, always returning to a modest classroom at Riverway. Classrooms filled with eager faces that saw him not as a novelty, but as a teacher, a living guide. One afternoon, during an advanced calculus class, Elijah wrote elegantly across the board, nested integrals and partial derivatives, forming a harmonious pattern. A young black student named Malik watched. His eyes were wide, brimming with wonder. Malik had struggled before, often told he wasn't cut out for math. Now he saw the curves and variables fall into place, carried not just by numbers, but by someone who had lived the narrative of redemption through logic. Elijah moved quietly among students, correcting a step here, illuminating a concept there. Malik's brow crinkled, then lifted in understanding. Suddenly a neuron sparked. After class, Malik lingered. He gathered courage, approached the board, pencil in hand. "Professor Brooks," he began softly, voice earnest. I think I understand it now." Elijah smiled warmly. He knelt beside Malik's desk. "You see what math truly is, truth and pattern. And you belong here." Malik nodded, his eyes shining. He wrote one more line on the board. "Dreams over hate, a hope." It wasn't a formal proof, but in that moment, it stood as equation complete. Students murmured. Teachers watched. Elijah gave a quiet nod, then turned away, chalk in hand. As students filed out, Malik paused at the doorway. He looked back at Elijah, voice soft as if sharing a secret. "Professor Brooks, I want to be like you." Elijah paused, chalk poised between his fingers, and smiled, hope solving what hate tried to erase. Some people spend their whole lives unseen, until the truth forces the world to look. If you've ever felt underestimated, erased, or silenced, this story was for you. Type yes if you believe brilliance has no uniform. Subscribe if this broke your heart, but gave you hope.